Hello and welcome to our viewers in Nigeria and around the world. Nigeria has for many years now been in the throes of a petroleum pricing crisis. For instance, between 2015 and now, the pump price of premium motor spirit, PMS, commonly known as petrol, has risen from 87 naira to 163 naira per liter. The explanation or excuse each time has always been price fluctuation in the international oil market, the cost of importation, landing cost, and cost of distribution of the product. This is even as government insists that it subsidizes the product. Otherwise, Nigerians should be paying much more for petrol, which is currently the only regulated product in the downstream sector of the petroleum industry. The PMS value chain currently accounts for about 60% of the entire petroleum products consumed in Nigeria. Now, on Thursday, less than 24 hours ago, the Nigerian government said it currently subsidizes the cost of PMS with about 120 billion naira, the equivalent of $263.2 million every month. The group managing director of the state-owned Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, Mele Kyari, said the NNPC absorbs the subsidy cost. According to him, the actual cost of importation and handling charges amounts to 234 naira per liter, while government bears sells it for 162 naira per liter.
As we speak today, the difference is being carried in the books of NNPC, and I can confirm to you that NNPC may no longer be in position to carry that burden because we cannot continue to carry it on our books. Evacuation from our depots, about 60 million liters per day. You are selling at 162 naira to the liter. Your current market price is around 234, actual market price today. So the difference between the two multiplied by 60 million times 30 will give you per month. I don't have the numbers now. This is a simple arithmetic that we can do. But if you want exact figures from our books, I do not have it this moment, but it's anywhere between 100 billion and up to 120 billion per month.
Now, this is one rare occasion when the government has publicly owned up to paying subsidy on petroleum products. But is the government telling Nigerians the whole truth about the rather opaque operations in the oil sector? The impact of the PMS pricing policy is far-reaching, as regular adjustments create ripple effects across every sector of the Nigerian economy, particularly the cost of transportation and food. A recent study undertaken by the Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, NEITI, with the support from the Facility for Oil Sector Transformation, FOSTA, on improving efficiency in the downstream petroleum sector, flagged a number of corruption enablers in the PMS distribution and sales for consumption chain. The study deals with the downstream, which is the end user stage of the industry comprising distribution and sales for product consumption. The study identified a number of inefficiencies in the sector, including the PMS importation process due to lack of local refining capacity. It also examines the linkage between the regulation process, corruption, and inefficiency. One of the recommendations of the study is the deployment of suitable and better technology by the relevant agencies in data capturing and management, and the tracking of product deliveries to depots and retail outlets. And just as the National Assembly, talking about the Nigerian National Assembly, continues to consider the Petroleum Industry Bill, the South-South Caucus of the House of Representatives is also recommending the unbundling and privatization of aspects of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, which the study says has overlapping functions with other relevant agencies and exercises what it describes as too heavy a hand in the industry. The findings of the study by Naty and Foster and its implications for the downstream sector is the focus of our discourse on this edition of People, Politics, and Power. We'll be joined very shortly by two very active participants in this sector, and we'll be looking at all the issues around it. Stay with us. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. People, Politics, and Power, and we're looking at the Nigerian downstream sector of the oil economy in Nigeria. I'm joined in the studio by two specialists in this area. First is Faith Nwandishi. She is the Executive Director, Center for Transparency Advocacy. Thank you, Faith, for joining us again.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Nigeria.
Also joining us is Oke Epia. Oke is the Executive Director, Other Paper Nigeria. Other Paper is Nigeria's preeminent policy think tank and multi-platform legislative interface, intervening in the extractive space through civic technology and policy advocacy. Okay, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Us.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. So let's begin by taking a look at, well, perhaps what is the latest today in the downstream sector of the Nigerian economy. The federal government says it spends about between 100 and 130 billion naira every month to subsidize PMS. Otherwise, per liter cost of PMS would be in the region of 230, 234. How does that come across?
Well, I like that your prelude report to this conversation raised a very important question, which is the government telling us the whole truth about the sector, what is going on and all of this? Let me break that question down. Is the government giving us all the necessary information to make a valid judgment? Given that we already have a huge trust deficit with the government, not just this government, by the way, generally. In this case, it is compounded. So when you do not have sufficient information or you have all of the indices to understand what they are saying, there is a huge tendency for you to think that, okay, they have come again, you know. And when you look at the fact that this is not the first time that we have heard figures about subsidy, and this is the same administration, indeed the same individual who told us that government no longer pays subsidy when it's deregulated, in quotes, the PRI or the downstream sector, you know, petrol and all of that. He told us openly it was some kind of campaign that government has taken its hands off, you know, the sector, the market forces will determine, so it was no longer paying subsidy or under recovery, as it likes to call it. You know, I mean, it's 5 and the difference is half a dozen and 6 anyways. Now the same government comes to you to say, look, we have been paying 120, 130 billion naira for subsidy, and we can no longer bear the cost. I don't know how you relate with that. I don't know how they want citizens to connect with that. This further depletes the amount of trust that citizens may want to hold on to as far as this government is concerned. So that's my first reaction to this. Are we paying subsidy again? We thought we were no longer paying subsidy. And given the fact that this is coming in the background of the uproar, indeed the outrage in some quarters around the Port Harcourt refinery rehabilitation or turnaround maintenance, whatever it is, for a huge sum of $1.5 billion. You know, so this seems like, okay, we have to tell these people why we need to actually spend this money, you know, to be able to do this refinery. So if you come to us with that and you come with what seems like a justification, you know, it may seem smart, but those of us who have access to certain information understand that this is actually not very smart, and this appears to be several attempts, one of several attempts to pull the wool over our eyes. And that is why I'm happy that we want to talk about this study report that examines and has identified areas of leakages, of inefficiencies, and possible corruptions in the downstream sector that the government knows fully, is fully aware of, but refuses or neglects to look at them and correct them. Chief of which is where we are, the petrol importation process. Why and how do we arrive, how did we arrive at the figures of liters that we import in this country? Who determines that? Who determines what should be the price bandwidth? Should it be the NNPC? Is it the business of the NNPC? These are some of the issues. You know, where is the PPP ROA suddenly in all of this, right? So how do we know the amount of petrol that we consume on a daily basis in this country? That is the fundamental question. Until we have an answer, a convincing answer to that question, all of this seems to be shrouded in secrecy, and we're just working from, you know, answer to questions. That's what this all seems like. We have to determine the fundamental question around the importation process. Before that, fundamentally, around the daily consumption estimation process. We cannot be working, you know, just picking figures in the air. In the course of this program, I'll give you data that suggests that people just pluck figures and decide this is what we need to import for this period of time. And it will shock you what you would hear.
Faith, you've been in the extractive industry sector for quite a while, and you understand these issues perhaps much better than some of us do. And this report by Nati and Foster is actually coming at a time, maybe some kind of coincidence, when government and through the NNPC GMD is saying, look, we are spending this much every month to subsidize the fuel that we need for almost all our daily operations here and there. Now, when you look at some aspects of this report, which we'll go into in detail, and this claim by the NNPC of over 100 to 120 billion every month as subsidy, are you convinced that we are being told the whole truth?
Thank you very much. I think already made some pointer to the fact that it's about trying to answer an already established question that Nigerians are trying to find out. You know, this whole question around deregulation started, and government has been saying, oh, from the first time, 2015, the whole idea was we're going to remove subsidy. And around, between 2017 and now, government came up with the idea that, oh, we don't have subsidy. The GMD of NNPC, August 2020, had a press conference, the same kind of press conference they had today, and said there was nothing like subsidy. In fact, we came to understand that they changed the terminology subsidy to under recovery. So when you have under recovery, you have to pay something to cover up your under recovery. But also along the line, they also had over recovery during the height of COVID, but nobody talks about that. So now you wake up less than 7 months after, and the same person is saying, oh, we have been picking this bill. The Minister for Finance said there's nothing like subsidy on the budget, and that's true. You won't see 0 naira for subsidy on the budget. Now, NNPC is saying we are the one that has been picking up that bill. So who do we believe?
So it's not budgeted for?
So it's not budgeted for. So how do you now account for that money that NNPC claims that they have been spending? If NNPC say we have been taking up this bill, What was the agreement that made NNPC to take up that bill? You know that since 2017 till now, NNPC had the sole right to import petroleum products. But we go out and say, oh, we are having market related prices. We're using market prices to tell Nigerians how much they're going to put. The last 2 weeks, you had PPP put down a template that they had put out to say this is going to be the new cost of petrol in the country because of the landing cost. What are the things that make PPP, for instance, put the cost for landing? And then when we talk about the issue around calculating the volume of petroleum that we need to import to meet our daily consumption, you know, in your opening statement, you talked about the refineries that we have. We have 4 refineries. Those 4 refineries, 2 in Port Harcourt, 1 in Warri, the other one in Kaduna, were built because they had intention of producing 445,000 barrels per day to meet our consumption daily. But NNPC is giving 450,000 barrels per day. Now, the same EITI report that we have in Nigeria, the NATI report, have told us over the years that these 4 refineries cannot even produce 20%. 20%
of the
445,000 barrels per day they are supposed to be producing. Not only that, they cannot produce 445,000 barrels per day. We had in the NNPC budget that these 4 refineries have been working and producing 0 naira, and we have been spending billions to sustain the workforce, their services, and their inefficiencies. So the only way you can come out to explain to Nigerians to support the claim that you are spending this money, so come out to say, oh, you know, we have actually been spending 120 billion per month on subsidy. So when you ask for the details, they will tell you, oh, you know, because this is not happening here, this is not happening here, this is what we are doing. And you know, the whole idea around spending 120 billion for subsidy, now this is what we do. Because we cannot refine our own products, what we do is that we give our crude oil out because we want refined products to come in. Now, when you refine crude, there are other byproducts apart from PMS. You have aviation fuel, you have kerosene, you have diesel, and so many other byproducts. Now, the one that we're really interested in is the PMS that come into the country. Now, you're telling me that if you give 10,000 barrels of crude, you give out 10,000 barrels of crude to a company to help you refine, and they send you back, maybe they send you back, say, 10,000 barrels of PMS. What happens to the other ones? Why do you now have to pay subsidy? What is the justification for you paying subsidy to meet up with the cost? Now we know that the cost of crude is going up. It's about 60-something dollars per barrel. What happens? How do you calculate that? Because when now what PPP and NNPC are telling us is that as the price of crude goes up, the landing cost increases because you are going to look at the cost of bringing it from the foreign country. You are going to also look at the cost of the all the other port costs and taxes that go in, and that is what they now calculate to tell you this is amount that they have. But truly now we don't even know the volume of crude that we produce in this country. We don't have that full data. It is what the international oil companies give us as a country that we come out and say we produce 2.3 million barrels per day. We don't have that data. And we also don't have the data about the volume of consumption per day. We don't have it. The only reason that they will tell you that they have a data is, for instance, you have your premises here, you come and you have trucks that take out products from your premises, and then you calculate the number of trucks that have come in a day times the volume of crude of refined product they've taken, and say that is the cost, that is the volume of consumption per day in the country. That is unacceptable anywhere this is done, because at the end when that truck leaves the depot where it's taking fuel to, you don't even know what happens to it before it gets to the retail point. There's nobody that is calculating the volume that gets to a particular retail point. There's nobody that is calculating how much volume the retail point is selling per day for us to now come in. So it's about, okay, I'm sitting somewhere. Let's assume we have 445,000 barrels, and then I as NNPC, I'm getting 450,000 barrels. Let's just calculate that. Are we actually using the 445,000 barrels? If you calculate that to what it comes to in PMS terms, then you go to somewhere, somebody is telling you these are the number of trucks that have left this depot, and because of that, this is the volume we are calculating. So it's all still shrouded in some opaque kind of nature. But you see, globally, these things have become very clear. Nigeria, for instance, this is where you have, people say we have the lowest cost of petrol. But you forget that those countries that we compare to our countries don't have the volume of crude that we have in our country. We have 4 refineries that are not working, and we go to a country like Niger that just built their refinery and rehabilitated their refinery, and we want to start importing fuel from Niger, and we are clapping for ourselves that we have done so well. So the whole question about the 120 billion per day that is just coming out now is just to tell Nigerians, when we begin to ask the questions, give us the breakdown of all of this. How did you come about that? So that at the end of the day, you say, okay, if they are paying 120 billion naira per month, it's per month. Calculate that per 12 months. Per 12 months. And then take that back till, as long as they have been telling us that they have not been paying subsidies and on the recoveries. You now know how much we are getting. And of course, the $1.5 billion that has just been voted for the rehabilitation of a refinery that has not made 1 naira return on investment in the past, let's say, 4 years. Not 1 naira return on investment. The same refinery, $300 million. $300 million in 2018 was released for the rehabilitation of that same refinery that we're releasing 1.5 billion now. The same refinery. So these are the fundamental questions we are asking. Who is in charge of putting these things out? You have an NNPC that has the sole right of importing fuel and determining, giving out contracts, the direct sales, direct purchase contract to people who will do that. And you have a petroleum equalization fund that is supposed to pay if you are giving that contract and you want to transport refined product from Lagos to, say, Kanu, for instance. They are supposed to pay what it will cost you. You know, the difference, so that all over the country you are selling petroleum at the same price. Meanwhile, there is already a policy that says we are going to use market prevailing cost to determine how much petrol. But you and I know that even if we buy 165 here in Abuja, in our communities where the crude is being exploited and taken, they're not buying 165. They are buying up to 200, 300 naira per liter. Per liter. And then, because it is PMS, that is petrol everybody is talking about, nobody knows that they have removed subsidy for kerosene. They have removed subsidy for AGO. Nobody's talking about that. That's why it's so expensive. But because the whole corruption is centered around the importation and the distribution of PMS, that is why it is out there in the open air.
Okay, let's get to understand this a little bit more. Because from the press conference given by the NNPC GMB, it appears what government is paying for in terms of subsidy is the cost of importation, landing cost, and all those other charges and all of that. But when you now hear him say, for instance, that okay, we sell at 162 naira, but we actually spend up to 230 naira or so to get a liter of fuel to the end user. One begins to wonder what then is being subsidized. If the Petroleum Equalization Fund is there, the PPPRO is there, and all these other agencies are there and are also at different junctions of the chain spending some kind of money to get this product across to the end users.
See, that's the thing. The government is further depleting an already depleted trust, deficits that it has with citizens. There is a disconnect between the importation of the products, the distribution, and the consumption. It is not rocket science to use data to tell Nigerians, this is what it is, this is what it is. You do what you call DSDP, direct sales, direct purchase. What that means, we have seen in that study, is that governments, the NNPC, takes the crude it gets for local consumption, takes it abroad, and gets an equal amount of PMS, which is the focus. Don't forget, she just made a valid point about the other byproduct that also come from the crude. We get an equal amount that should take care of the local consumption, daily consumption. You know, so the question is, where is this payment coming from? If DSDP is some kind of trade by barter, and look at the other side as well, there is a template for determining the price bandwidth. They say they have deregulated, so we cannot talk of price fixing, even though that is in a sense what is going on. There is a template put forward by the PPP. It's actually supposed to be a monthly thing, but that agency has, you know, has reneged on its responsibilities. It is shaking its responsibility, perhaps due to the heavy hand of the NNPC, but it shouldn't have been so. If you look at that template, you see certain parameters broken down that gives you how they arrive at what they call the ex-depot prices. And this includes the cost of the liter of the product, it includes the cost for insurance, the cost for storage, the jetty throughput prices, a couple of them, and a few of them, I think about 5 of these cost elements are fixed. They are usually fixed. They are determined by stakeholders. And don't forget, PPPRA is culpable, very culpable here, because it is supposed to be the agency seized by law with the responsibility to determine the mechanisms for the receipt and distribution of PMS and the products in this country. Because it has a board. It is the agency of government that has a board, 26-member board that is representative across the value chain, from marketers to government agencies to labor, Pengas and TUC, they are all on that board, right? Even the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. So it should not be a problem where we don't have data. That board is representative, and the law provides that it should be very independent. It should only perhaps take directives or any form of interference from Mr. President. So what we see here is the law turned upside down. That's one point. So you go back to the issue of importation and the lack of details, the lack of data about that DSDP program. The lack of the fact that we don't understand what we are paying for. The under recovery is coming from what? When you have a template that is determined, and by the last published template by the PPPRA, what it amounts to is about 160, a little around that figure for the landing cost. And that includes margins for both the wholesaler and the retailer. That's part of the cost elements. So where is the under recovery or subsidy coming from? We need to be told. We need to be convinced that government or the NNPC is actually paying this sum of money. That is on one hand. On the other hand, I made the point earlier, how does NNPC determine on its own that this is the quantity of petroleum we need, of petrol, PMS we need in this country?
Which speaks to the issue of data, which is what I'm coming to. Because Faith alluded to it earlier on. Do we know the quantity of crude that we export out of this country? Do we have reliable data on how much of that is brought back to Nigeria and in what form? Do we know how much is taken out of the ports and how much is distributed to the depots and what ends up with the retailers? Does this report, does it give any indication as to how this data is gotten, is captured, and is managed?
So the report raises these questions, and I'm happy that the methodology adopted by the researchers who made the report included an inclusive consultation process of some of these, all of the agencies. Indeed, if you read the detailed report, you see that they had meetings and consultations with the NNPC, with the PP, all of them, you know, so they had certain form of data. But the problem we continue to have is the opacity, the lack of transparency and accountability in the sector. If you are not able to tell us how you determine what we consume daily, on what basis are you importing? The report says, for instance, that within a space of between 2018 and 2019, you had a volume variation of between 34.8 million liters up to 67 million liters. You see the differential. On a monthly basis, so for some months you have 34 point something liters, you know, they say we consume daily. In another month, you say we have 50 point something. In another month, you have 40. On what basis? What is the factors? What are the factors? What is the variation? Do we suddenly have more population within that period of a month? Do we suddenly have, was there a national emergency that required that, you know, we consume more product? There is no valid, objective data collection and data aggregation process. So all of this is a rule of the thumb thing by some officials who just sit there and say, look, this is what we think we need, and you import it. and then you import it, and we do not know because we do not have a process or a mechanism for determining the last mile consumption. And that is what Faith was alluding to. You simply just sit there and calculate the truck out quantities from the depot, but it doesn't end there because we already know that some of these products are taken out of the country, for instance. Some of these products never even get to be taken out of the depot, but they are counted. So the only way, like the report suggests and recommends, is to have a last mile authentication process at the retail outlets where Nigerians actually interact with the product, where they purchase it. People should be able to know based on what you sell, what you buy, what you received at your petrol station for this period of time, and do an aggregation of all of that. It's likely to give you a sense of the data, but that is not going on, and it is deliberate. And I tell you why, because provisions have been made for that to happen. The PEF, for instance, is very important, but very opaque and very, very interesting agency of government.
That's the Petroleum Equalization Fund.
Exactly. Has, is supposed to have that mechanism for determining that last mile consumption process. I tell you, in 2017 or 2018, the Federal Executive Council appropriated or approved 17 billion naira to purchase a software, my brother, just a software. They call it Aquila. That is supposed to determine the consumption, this consumption, last mile, but it doesn't do that. What has happened to that money?
17 billion.
17 billion for software. It's in the media. I'm not raising these figures from the air.
Exactly.
So if this is not working, why is it not working? So that's why I say to you, it's possible that these are deliberate, contrived opacity to keep some people to benefit, to keep them benefiting from all of these inefficiencies, loopholes, and possible corruptions. She made the point, why is it that in spite of the PEF and what it claims to do, we still have these price differentials across the country? So why is it existing? Why do we have the organization? So these are the issues that these reports raise. Government should deal with these issues. So it is not enough to throw figures at us and let us swallow them and say, look, oh, this is why we have to accept a price increase. No, break these things down for us. Convince us. We are citizens. We demand to know these things, and we are entitled to know them. Right? So if we get this information, we can interact with them, we can engage continually and come to some level of understanding. It's okay, yes, now we know where you're coming from. We know you also have to appreciate where we are coming from, then we can reach a midpoint. But there is an obstinacy on the part of the government, the supply side actors, not to do that. And it's quite painful, and it is frustrating. And it escalates the trust deficit that I talk about. Until government wakes up from that mentality of, look, we treat these people like a conquered citizen, this is not going to work. Nigerians are becoming aware. These kind of reports are going to become available everywhere. People will see them and see through the schemes and more questions. And it's not good for an administration that prides itself as an anti-corruption, administration. These are the issues. These are the issues, and much more in that report you will see if we go further.
We want to go on a very short break, but when we return, you should be taking us through some of the what the report or that study describes as 7 corruption enablers in the value chain. That's when we return from the break. Still very much here with me, Wadishi Faith, Executive Director, Center for Transparency Advocacy, and Oke Epia, who is the Executive Director, Other Paper Nigeria. Now, Faith, let's come to you. This report or this study talks about inefficiencies and corruption enablers in the distribution chain. But before then, let's go to your earlier interjection.
Okay, thank you very much. I was going to address the question of the volumes that we have. We have the DPRO. The DPRO is supposed to be the agency that gives us all of those volumes. According to NATI report,
that's the Department of Petroleum
Resources. Yes, they actually play oversight over these technical areas. But when it comes to pricing of PMS and distribution, DPRO seems to be missing from the picture. So that's why you have those areas around what's the volume that we consume, how much should we put. Other agencies take up that responsibility. But for the volumes we don't have.
Could that be what this study talks about when it talks of overlap of
yes,
functions.
Yes, exactly. Overlap of functions. For instance, we mentioned that PPPRA is supposed to give us the price, the pump price of fuel, following the landing cost and the template that they give. But you have an NNPC that is the sole importer of PMS. So NNPC imports PMS and tells you we are paying 120 billion for as under recovery, not subsidy. They don't use the word subsidy. I'm surprised they started using subsidy yesterday. They used to call it under recovery because a lot of Nigerians are saying, oh, there's no more subsidy now. So to just change it and call it under recovery. So the EITI report in Nigeria, from the first report that was released in 2004 till date, has always said we don't know the actual volume of crude that we produce, because the measurement of crude that we produce in this country is not taken at wellheads. It is at wellhead that production is made. Now, the oil companies come to tell you, the argument is that at wellhead, crude comes with impurities and water. But we know, as our primary, elementary chemistry and all of those scientific things, that when you know the volume of something, by the time you remove the water, you remove the impurities, you actually know the volume. Tell us the actual volume at wellhead before you now take it to terminals. What the 2.3 million barrels per day that we produce is what is produced at terminals. And you remember again that they have been talking about the issue of oil theft, which we are not even going to go into because of this conversation. How do we now know the volume that is stolen? Who steals it? Is it you and I, common people who don't even know how those pipelines are laid? Do you know the pressure, the depth, the pressure that people will have to go to, the technology that you will have to deploy for you to steal crude? So those are the other things. But this report clearly talked about, one, some of these issues we have already been talking about, the overlapping responsibilities from the different agencies that are supposed to midwife it through the value chain. We have also talked about this thing about whether subsidy or under recovery, who is putting all of that, and the fact that you have agencies in this country that you have given mandates that don't even understand the mandate that they have been given to. It's just about, oh, if the board of this organization wants to be set up, everybody wants their own person. It becomes another political appointment, without having technocrats who understand the process sitting there. So let's assume you have a board of 26 persons. And out of those 26 persons, you have 20 people as politicians. Maybe two real technocrats. And they are trying to make suggestions, and the politician is only thinking about return on investment.
And probably do not understand the operating system.
Exactly. So the technician is trying to make input to better the system. The politician is looking at return on investment, because, of course, some of these appointments don't come cheap. They don't come cheap. So you have return on investment, and so it is not about what the people out there want to see. So it's just about you making all of those. So those are some of the things. And the fact that our refiners are not working. Our refiners are not working because some people are benefiting from it. Just imagine putting 1.5 billion into an investment that is not yielding you return on investment. 1.5 billion. After you had already put, I'm not talking, so that when I'm talking Nigerians, it's not 1.5 billion naira. It's $1.5 billion into an investment. Somebody is definitely reaping from that process. So it is better that the refinery does not work, or if I must continue to reap from that process. So these are some of the things. And so even the report also talks about, we have talked about, what I'm saying is that most of the 7 issues, no accurate data on consumption. I have just said that the 4 refineries we have, we're supposed to produce 445,000 barrels to meet our local consumption. Now, that 445,000 barrels is given to NNPC. It's given to NNPC so that NNPC will bring it back as a already refined product. What does NNPC do with that product? NNPC sends that product out to get it refined and brought to us. By the way, that contract we signed with Niger Republic last year, the contract we signed for Niger Republic to bring us refined product, it's not part of the 445,000 barrels of petrol that NNPC sends out to. We don't sell crude to Niger. Niger sends us refined product from their own crude. So that people will understand that aspect of it. So when all of these things happen, because that's why I'm so happy we have the EITI in Nigeria. Without the EITI, somebody like myself sitting there, I cannot even be talking about the extractive industry, because it's more like the more you look, the less you see. But with the EITI reports that we have, that are shown consistently, one, We don't know. We're just saying Nigeria is the 7th largest oil producer in the world because we produce 2.3 barrels per day. Is that really what we produce per day? We don't know what we produce at wellhead. We only know what we produce at terminals. And terminals is when they're about to take it out. Oh. That is when they're about to take it out. So all of these issues, and then the report also talked about the price differential, which we had also talked about. Why is it that you have the Petroleum Equalization Fund, as the name, Petroleum Equalization, so that you will have the cost of petrol the same you are buying in Zamfara, you are buying in Abuja, and you are buying in my home state of Delta. But the reality is that you buy 165 here in Abuja, but you can go back to my home state of Delta in my community and buy 250 naira per liter. So where is the equalization? Where is the equalization that people are asking for? So unless we have that technology, he just talked about the Aquila technology
yes,
that we're supposed to now use to really find out. Now let me shock you further. At the depot point where they do that truck in and truck out, there is a device that is put on the trucks to monitor the movement of those trucks. Do you know what happens? As soon as those trucks leave the depot, they remove it. And then you know along the road we have these our tax forces, petroleum tax force. They're just there to take money. They're not doing anything. They're not doing anything. You see them with that long seat, they go and dip. If you settle, they allow you to go. If you don't settle, that's the only case that we hear that they are trying to take away fuel from our country. The fundamental question to ask about PMS distribution and consumption in this country is, why will our refineries not work?
Okay, so let's move on very quickly to the recommendations of this study. And there are quite a number here. And it all speaks to some of the issues that we've been talking about here. Talk to us more about those recommendations. National daily PMS demand, import quantities, pricing, margins to importers, charges to other stakeholders, and all of that as headers to the recommendations.
Thank you very much. The key one, which is the foundation, is that's estimation of the daily consumption data. We need to have that information because it's upon which every other factor is built. Once we're able to have that, and it is not rocket science, mechanisms have been put in place, like we already have seen, to have that we're not having it, it shows some deliberate, attempt by some people to continue to perpetuate and benefit from the inefficiencies and possible corruption that we are seeing. And don't forget, this all boils down to the price, to the pocket of the Nigerian. All of this is pushed to the pocket of the Nigerian to pay more. So they tell you, tighten your belt. You need to tighten your belt. And as you are tightening your belt, they are losing theirs because they are getting bigger and fatter. And so, that's an inverse proportion. It's not going to work. It's not working. So the key thing is, let us have that data and have a conversation around it. Let's be sincere about it. It cannot be justified anywhere in the world that within a space of 1 year period, 12 months, for each month you have a variation of up to 30 million liters per day consumed. What is the basis for that? How do you justify that? So in the month of January, you have 30...
probably more vehicles on
you have more vehicles.
And who has that data?
Where did they come from? Who has that data? You probably have less vehicles suddenly in the next month, and then the figures drops. Come on.
So can the PPPRA actually be made to be independent, an independent body to do its work as independently as it can be?
That is the objective, and it can, because it has a board, I noted earlier, that is fairly representative.
26-member board,
26
made up of politicians and...
politicians, but you have a representation even from labor, even from the media, even from the Bureau of Statistics. So it's not all politicians. And when we talk about politicians, yes, it is political. But look at what NNPC is doing with, this subsidy and recovery that is not budgeted for. Is it NNPC's money? The money does not even belong to the federal government or the federal tier of government. It belongs to the government of Nigeria. So the governors are interested. The other tiers of government are interested. NNPC, what it does is ultra-vires as far as the Constitution of the Federal Republic is concerned. It expends monies that are not appropriated for. And so when the National Assembly says it is probing, or like it is currently doing, the DSDP program. We are waiting for what that probe would amount to. They did one. I said 2017, 2018. Nobody knows what happened to that probe. We still don't have the figures that we need to properly interrogate consumption, to properly interrogate and understand what DSDP means. So they are doing it again. So everyone should be interested. It's not about just, oh, okay, they are politicians. No, politicians too are interested, because if the money goes to where it should rightly go, to the states, it makes things also happy. It makes people also happy and makes things also work in the states. Exactly. So if we fix that daily consumption rate, it will help us to determine the volume of importation that we need of petroleum products while we are dealing with the issues of fixing the refineries, of Dangote refineries. And we must cut out the corruption, by the way, the inefficiency and the waste. You cannot spend 325 billion naira as reported loss in 4 refineries in the space of 2018 to 2020. 325 billion naira. That's what the NNPC reported as loss for the 4 refineries. Suddenly, you now realize that, you want to fix. I'm happy, and I give that to him. Yesterday, I listened to the GMD of NNPC admitted that they made a strategic error in not dealing with these refineries issues long before now. But then who pays for all of these things? Nigerians. Who pays for all of this lack of transparency, inefficiency, waste, accountability? They always push it to the average Nigerian, and it is not fair. It is not right. It is even arrogant, because they do not converse with Nigerians. They do not engage with Nigerians. They have been meetings. At our own levels, we do meetings. We invite them. They barely come. Yeah. They will call you and say, look, look, look. They may not even call you. They ignore you. And then they sit in the cocoon of their offices and reel out figures, and like I said, thank God, like you said, thank God for the EITI that makes some of this data available, and then we can interrogate them. Good enough, these data are validated and authenticated by the same authorities who ignore their citizens.
Exactly.
You get what I'm saying? So that's the point.
Is this study report available to these relevant government agencies, for instance?
It is, because they participated in it. Yes. It is a publicly available document. The NATE Secretariat is there. These reports are they are even on our website. They are publicly, it's available. It is just that sheer intransigence that, look, we'll do this and nothing will happen. Arrogance. We must cut it, and it has to end now. Otherwise, we'll just be taking like, okay, Nigerians, nothing will happen, but we saw what happened at NSAS. It will come to a head someday. We must watch out for it.
So Faith, what would be your suggested way forward at this point in time? If you had the opportunity of interacting with the relevant government agencies, the NNPC, Petroleum Equalization Fund, PPP, and all the others that are involved in this chain, what would you be telling them? What should they be doing at this point?
They should look at their mandate and interpret their mandate and make sure they implement it the way it is supposed to be implemented. We should go away from just painting a bad picture to look it good, make it good. Let me just give you a very practical example on this DSDP thing that we're working on right now. The NNPC made a commitment to the OGP that they were going to disclose DSDP contracts to the world to see. 2 weeks ago, we wrote a letter, FRI letter, to the NNPC to give us the copies of the DSDP contracts that they signed. And they just wrote back to us through their lawyer that it is not a publicly available document. So that is just one example of what is happening. You say one thing and you do another thing. What we need to say to them is sit down, streamline what your duties are, and implement the policies or the laws that have set you up. That is our fundamental problem. If we do that and let Nigerians know what you are doing, I am telling you, we will ease corruption, at least 50% of the corruption that is along that value chain.
Okay, one final word.
The PPPRA should wake up to its responsibility. It has a mandate provided by the law. It should disallow the NNPC from riding roughshod. It is not the business of the NNPC to announce and fix prices. The NNPC, unfortunately, is currently a regulator and a player. The PIB is going to solve that, thankfully. But the PPPRA should wake up from its slumber and do what it is mandated by law to do. The Petroleum Equalization Fund should also stop pulling wool over the eyes of Nigerians. They have been empowered to ensure equalization of prices while we still operate this, this deregulation in quotes. They should do that. And while they do that, they have a responsibility. It is their duty to give us the data at the last mile. If you spend 17 billion naira to acquire a software and it is not working, you have to tell us. Somebody should be held accountable. Yeah. We have come to that stage in this country where it is not enough to say we lost 325 billion naira in fixing refineries that didn't produce a single drop of oil.
So, nobody is being held
accountable. There must be accountability.
All right, thank you so much. That's why we have to draw the curtain today. Okay, Epia is the Executive Director, Order Paper Nigeria. And he's been joined by Wandishi Faith, who is the Executive Director, Center for Transparency Advocacy. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
That's our program today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. And thank you very much for investing your time with us. Bye for now.